Yay, good morning. So today I'm talking about disruption and how you disrupt entire industries. So the question that was asked is, what does it take to disrupt a traditional industry? So I'm going to start this by looking back in time a little bit and thinking about how disruption has taken place in the past. Okay, so let's go back 800 years to the time of medieval knights running around in armour and a bunch of peasants working in the field. Somebody came up with this wonderful idea called the watermill. Quick, easy way of grinding the corn, turning it into flour. You did that, you saved loads of time, loads of effort, loads of money, and you could then go out, do more farming to make more food so that your family survived. Yeah, this was so successful that in the decades and centuries after it was came into use in Europe, tens of thousands of water mills appeared across Europe, and in some cases there were so many on the rivers that they actually slowed the flow of the river. And this innovation was really cool because what happened, it wasn't the technology, it was the fact that so many people went out and innovated the technology. The next great innovation was the printing press. Before the printing press, you had a bunch of people writing out books by hand. They were copying the books out into wonderful, beautiful manuscripts. There were people in monasteries who spent their whole lives copying. You had commercial copyists, but basically the printing press changed all that because you could go chunk, 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 chunk. Every time you went chunk, you get a new page of text. Instantly you got a book, and people loved this. It spread knowledge, it spread propaganda, it spread fake news. It was awesome for absolutely everybody. But again, it was not the technology, it was the adoption of it, because you got Johannes Gutenberg came up with his printing press, and very quickly there were thousands and thousands and thousands of printing presses across the country, across Europe. And it was this mass adoption that created the disruption to the existing copying industry. Let's move forward a few centuries to the early, the late 1800s, early 1800s, late 17th century, and canals. And big problem at this point, because people, if you wanted to move stuff, heavy industrial goods across country, basically you didn't have many more advances to you than the Egyptians did when they were building the pyramids, or they had when they were building Stonehenge 3,000-4,000 years ago. You basically got rollers, rope, and a bunch of horses or men, and dragged it along. Yeah, what a canal did, you got a nice trench, filled it with water, put a boat on it, and then got a couple of horses and a man to slowly pull the boat along. And this meant that you could now start moving materials in bulk: iron ore, copper ore, coal, grain. All these things could be moved tens of tons at a time, when the a typical wagon load might be as small as 100 kilos. Yeah, so huge orders of magnitude improvement in both speed and carrying capacity. And what was interesting here, it wasn't individuals now who were jumping into the market as they saw the possibility for innovation. No, it was companies. And what you see is companies raising money to make the capital investment into the canals. A few decades later, you got the railways coming along, and this was very much a modern industrial enterprise. As the railway companies went out, they saw the possibilities of the railway, of the steam engine, for moving both people now and goods, and being able to do it faster and better than before. But again, it wasn't the technology. In England, it was the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little railway companies that started up and built their own little railway to solve a problem in their own little part of the world. Where I come from, in Birmingham, which was the centre of the Industrial Revolution, there was one railway company who built a railway that was 2.5 miles long. For some reason, they thought that they were going to make a profit and be world beating doing something like that. It didn't work. And what you then got were the railway companies consolidating over a period of 50, 60 years. these hundreds and thousands of small railway companies consolidated down into 4 big railway companies, the big 4, and then eventually into nationalisation as the government forced that. But what's interesting here is why did some of those railway companies succeed and most of them fail? In that case, it was to do with the network effects, and people who concentrated in a particular area were able to achieve real economies of scale. Yeah, and this carries on into the next example I'm going to give you, which was the oil industry. When oil was discovered in Texas, in the southern states of the US, basically the way that it worked, you had an oil rig, then you had somebody to take the oil from the oil rig to the refinery, so then somebody to refine it, then somebody to take the oil from the refinery to the eventual consumers. And this was fragmented. Every Tom, Dick and Harry had his own little oil well. You had people collecting oil in carts, with horse and carts, and taking the oil to, say, the railway station, where it was decanted into a train with canisters, tanks, and the train with the tanks was then taking it to the refinery to be turned into goods. This was very inefficient, and there were thousands of players in the market. And so what guy did, some guy said, his innovation was, okay, what happens if we own all of it? What happens if we own the oil wells, the transportation, the refineries, the distribution network? And this guy, with this business model innovation, went out and dominated the whole of the oil industry. He became the richest man in the world, Rockefeller, with Standard Oil, and its survivor nowadays is Exxon, which is still one of the largest companies in the world, despite having the vast majority of its monopoly taken away from him. Let's move on now into the modern era. Let's look at cars and what happened when you disrupted the transportation industry and you killed off all the horse and carts and carriages. Yeah, people knew this was going to happen. There were thousands of people wanting to get the first automobile. I mean, just off the top of my head, there are at least 4 different ways that people in 1900 were experimenting with and had successful commercial companies making and manufacturing motor cars. They were cars based on the petrol internal combustion engine. There were companies based on the diesel engine. There were electric car companies. There were hydraulic and steam car companies. And these were all competing for the transportation industry. Yeah, hundreds and thousands of them. Henry Ford started, I think, 2 or 3 separate automobile companies, right? So much competition. And there was this wave of new entrants coming into the market. Why did Ford succeed where 99.9% of the other companies failed? Yeah, he had an innovation in business methods. Yeah, his innovation was not anything to do with cars. It was how to make cars more efficiently, more effectively, not the technology that disrupted the industry. And you see the same thing happening in the 1970s and 1980s with hard disks. Yeah, you got the new technology came out. Yeah, you got a whole horde of hard disk manufacturers for computers coming out and making hard disks. Then a new technological innovation would come out, new batch of entrants, and they totally wiped out the existing hard disk manufacturers. And so for, I think, about 3 or 4 waves of this, people who had made hard disks previously were just wiped out. They didn't exist. They went bankrupt, went out of business, because the disruptive effects were so great. And it was only when Seagate and Western Digital got their acts together in the early 90s that this type of disruption changed. You also see it in things like search and ride sharing, where there is an idea, there is the technology, there are lots and lots of entrants into the market, and then most of them get wiped out. Why do they get wiped out? It's because of business model innovation. People figuring, okay, I've got 1,000 people doing exactly the same thing as me that I'm competing with. None of us can win market share. What can I do differently? How can I do that? So they're not disrupting the existing market, they are trying to disrupt all the new entrants that are coming into the market. This is how you disrupt and dominate a market. So summing all this up, if you want to disrupt a existing business model, this is what you need. You need lots of technological innovations that are widely known by lots and lots of people, and you have thousands of new entrants entering the market, whether it is AI, lift sharing, blockchain, cryptocurrencies. Yeah, and then one of them discovers a business model that gives it a significant competitive advantage over all the others. It's not a technological advantage in the vast majority of cases. It is some sort of way of doing business better. For Standard Oil, it was supply chain integration. For Ford, it was mass production. For Toyota, it was quality systems. For Google, it was, oh, this is how we can make money by an auction. Yes, these are the innovations that are disruptive. It's not the technology. And so one discovers a business model, and then they use that to rapidly consolidate the industry and drive out everybody else, bankrupt them or acquire them. And you can see how very successfully Google did that in search and online advertising to Yahoo, Microsoft with Bing, Ask Jeeves, Alta Vista, everybody else. So what does it take to disrupt a traditional business model? Lots of new technology innovation, widespread knowledge of that innovation, lots of new entrants, and then you go out and you crush the new entrants with an innovative business model. Thanks for listening. Oops.